introductions for today. Greg, please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thanks a lot, Mike, and welcome everyone. I'm really glad to have you all here, and very glad to see that the number of people who are convened in small sort of groups is more than we typically see. So that tells me that there's a lot of colleagues out there who are convened together to learn about look at the attendee list, and it's very interesting to see a range of colleagues from educators to researchers to curators and registrars, exhibit designers, public programs, docent managers, really a whole range of colleagues in the audience, which is really terrific. And with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Christine Reach, who is the Director of Research and Evaluation and the outgoing chair of CARE. Christine, welcome today.
Thank you.
And Christine, I know when we first started thinking about this program, you had a couple of big thoughts. One is the work of CARE is in part focused on those people who conduct audience research and evaluation, but also to help other colleagues in our museums better understand what we mean by audience research and evaluation. So maybe you can take a moment to tell everybody about CARE and how this particular program came to be.
Sure. So CARE is one of the standing professional networks of the American Association of Museums, and we are a volunteer network. So it's comprised completely of volunteers, individuals who are members of AAM who also self-selected to be affiliated with CARE. And we are really open to anyone who's interested in understanding the visitor or including the visitor as part of the museum planning and operations process. And we're also interested in people who want to learn more about systematic research and evaluation pertaining to a variety of museum audiences. So a lot of the evaluation work that's going on out there is not just focusing on visitors anymore. It's also focusing on professional development programs that are for other museum professionals and a number of other museum audiences. So that's who CARE is. We host events during the annual meeting. We have a LinkedIn page that we certainly encourage you, all of you, to join our LinkedIn group, as well as a presence on Facebook. And if anyone's really interested in learning more about audience research and evaluation and kind of want to help foster this community, we have a number of volunteer positions that are available. So we're always looking for people who can help us think about professional development. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to host professional development, but you could be a user of evaluation who's interested in professional development, and also people who can help us to build our online community. As Greg mentioned, one of the things that I think is unique about CARE is that people who conduct audience research and evaluation are generally doing it in concert with other individuals within their museum. So we never really, particularly those of us that are internal, we're never doing studies for ourselves. We're doing studies that help to inform the decision-making in exhibits, in programs, for curators, for museum management, for marketing. And one of the things that we've come to realize is how closely we work with all the different professional networks that are part of AAM. And one of the hardest parts we find for people who are working with us is not understanding how to conduct the studies, but figuring out when is research and evaluation going to be a meaningful part of what you do. When is the appropriate time to ask a question? What are the kinds of questions you can ask of visitors, and not just kind of what are you going to put on the survey, but what are the questions that you have yourself that are appropriate to bring to visitors, to bring to your various audiences. And in speaking with members of the other professional networks, it was this idea of evaluation use, figuring out when to integrate it into your planning process, when to ask those questions. That was really critical. And so that became the impetus for this particular webinar, to look at various organizations and how they've integrated evaluation into their thinking and their planning in a very broad way, to help others in the field to start thinking differently about where evaluation fits within their own organization.
And Christine, no, terrific. And in fact, you and I were talking just yesterday about creating a culture of what you called evaluative thinking.
Yes. So one of the theories that I have, and I've seen this play out in my own organization, is that what's important for an organization is not to have an evaluator on staff or an evaluation department, but to really be engaged in this process of evaluative thinking. And evaluative thinking is being defined with people in a broader evaluation field, not just museum evaluation, but a broader field, as kind of getting honed at asking questions about one's own practice. So thinking critically about what you do, why you do it, and then systematically gathering data about your practice, and then reflecting upon that data to see what does this mean for how I can improve the way I do things. So part of that is planning out what is it that I want to achieve, what will be, what not only will I produce, like an exhibit or a program, but what do I want people to take away from that? What's the outcome, the learning goal, the experiential goal that I have for that experience? And that's part of evaluative thinking. The other part then is systematically gathering data about that and then thinking about what that data means. Did you get there, and how can you change things the next time, or how can you change things now so you can get closer to where you want it to go? And I think within my own organization, what I see is now that evaluation is institution-wide here, we do have a pretty extensive research and evaluation department that does do pretty sophisticated studies at times. But I think what's more core is just the number of smaller scale studies that some people are conducting within their own departments that demonstrate that kind of evaluative thinking that gets us closer to achieving our mission.
Great. Thanks, Christine. And this is a terrific introduction to our presenters today, who come from a range of institutions and backgrounds. Our first presenter will be Matt Sikora, who, as he mentioned, is the Manager of Research and Evaluation for the Arts Education Collaborative at the Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh. We'll also be joined a little bit later by Martha Hill, who is the Vice President for Public Programs and Visitor Experience at the Eiteljorg Museum in Indianapolis, and Christy O'Grady, who is a Chief Conservator and Exhibitions Manager at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. And a short nod to both Martha and Christy, that the silos picture previously was in honor of them in the heartland. Today's program obviously is focused on placing evaluation at the center of institutional decision-making, and as Christine described, fostering a culture where evaluation is utilized and embraced across departments and levels. And we'll be exploring all of that through some successes and challenges in various institutions. Our goals, of course, are to help you be better able to communicate the importance of evaluation with internal and external stakeholders, and to create institutionally collaborative evaluation plans that engage colleagues within your institution, and of course to use evaluation for data-driven decision-making. So we're going to kick off our audience engagement section here by asking you and the audience if you have evaluation or research in your job title or specific function. And Mike, thanks for bringing that poll up. So it looks like about a 50-50 split, more or less. Christine or anybody, does that surprise you in any way?
Not at all. What we see in our membership of CARE is that oftentimes most of the people who are involved with CARE aren't professional evaluators or researcher. The other thing that we're noticing is, in terms of the field, is there's a lot of people whom I would call accidental evaluators. And I don't know if any of you out there feel like you fall into this mix, but there are individuals who work in the organization who take on the role of being the evaluator. Sometimes it's because someone's been handed it over to you and said, we need to do an evaluation. You are the closest person I can think of who could do something like this. Go ahead and do it. Other times it's because you're passionate about visitors and you really want to integrate this into your organization. And so I'm not surprised, because I think as a field that's where we are right now, that most of us are accidental evaluators. And that's actually how I started off in evaluation in the first place. I don't know if any of my other speakers have any thoughts on that.
This is Matt Sikora. I think I think the title of the webinar really encourages that cross collaboration. So it's good to see, as Greg mentioned, people in the same room together and people from different functions.
Well, with that, Matt, why don't we go ahead and leap into your section of the program on planning for institution-wide evaluation.
Thank you, Greg. The subtitle of today's webinar, as you know, is Ensuring Evaluation is Institution-Wide. And I have to confess that I really struggle with how to define institution-wide evaluation. I think a lot of that struggle comes from the fact that every organization is a little bit different. And personally, I've really come to understand that in the last month. I've just left the Detroit Institute of Arts, which has a staff of about 300 people. And I've joined an organization with a grand total of 5 staff members. And I can say with great certainty that what it means for evaluation to be institution-wide looks a whole lot different now. So I'd like to begin with a question. And that question is, from your perspective, what does it mean for evaluation to be institution-wide in your organization?
And we'll just spend a moment letting some of you type an answer into that chat box that's on the screen.
So Susan writes collaborative and cross-departmental. Amber is talking about everyone in an organization. Again, more of that being cross-departmental, being used in decision-making. Anthony is talking about from the board level down through every part of an organization, respect from visitors, for visitors. And Jim talks about using a survey for multiple purposes, maybe not just meeting the needs of one department. So it's good to see all of those different ideas about what it means for evaluation to be institution-wide. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind as we're talking about this, that it's not a single thing. It can be many different things depending on what organization you're in and your position within the organization. One framework that I think is particularly useful for thinking about evaluation at a large scale was proposed by Gary Henry and Melvin Mark. They suggest that evaluation is analogous to other types of programs that are meant to have an impact on an audience. So just as we might think about planning a program for our visitors, things like what they're going to experience, how they might feel, think, or act differently as a result, we might think about planning an evaluation program for staff members or other stakeholders, what staff is going to experience and how they might feel, think, or act differently as a result. Other authors have written about how learning should be the goal of most, if not all, evaluations. So an advantage of this framework and thinking about evaluation this way as a program is that I think many of us have some familiarity with that approach to designing a program. And there are some relatively familiar frameworks for mapping out the steps toward increasing the impact of evaluation in your institution. In planning programs for your audience, your organizations may have used some tools before, logic models, theories of change, program theories. People use different words, but it's all about trying to understand and communicate what you were going to do, who was going to participate, and what the intended outcomes were for a project. Mark and Henry suggest that if evaluations are programs, then you can apply these types of tools to evaluation too. They even sketched out a basic logic model for evaluation. Here's their model. I think it's not so important what terms they use. Different people use different terms in logic models. But the general concept, I think, is what's critical here. The intended impacts are the goals which should guide the decisions you make when planning and implementing your evaluation program. Again, what do you hope staff will think, feel, or do as a result of engaging with evaluation? For the rest of my part of the presentation, I'd like to touch on a couple of key factors that we typically consider when designing a program and use them as a framework for thinking about evaluation.
And Matt, this is Greg. I want to interrupt just a moment and let everybody in the audience know that that logic model is in the handout that you got. It's a little fuzzy, so we're going to reproduce that and make sure that you get that as part of a clean handout. Just wanted to acknowledge that to everybody.
So one of the most important factors when you're starting to think about a program is to think about your current setting, which is your starting point. The differences between your organization and others' organizations are why there's no single right approach to take toward increasing the impact of evaluation. So I have another question for you. What are the factors that affect evaluation at your institution? As you can see, we have 2 boxes, and what I'd really like to see is if we can actually have more factors in the positive side than the negative side. So it was a challenge keeping track of all this feedback that came in on 1 box. So I'm not sure how I'm going to do with 2. But on one side, talking about consistency being a challenge, technical limitations, different levels of buy-in. On the other side, I think we see some of the same issues, but maybe being positive factors. Jennifer writes about leadership support, program staff being engaged, collaboration. I see Teresa from Chicago. You have both sides, so there are positives and negatives happening in the same institution. On the positive side, it looks like there's a lot of interest going on. On the challenges side, we see money and time, and on both sides. So we see consistent themes, it looks like. The same types of things keep coming up, but depending on your organization, they might be a weakness or a strength. One of the challenges being prioritization of projects. Talk a little bit about that a little bit later in the presentation. And I'm wondering if my co-presenters have, if anything, standing out for them as they take a look at the list.
This is Martha from the Eiteljorg, and definitely these things are ringing true here with some of the things that we've faced in the last few years as we've been implementing our program, particularly looking at, of course, money and time. Robin from Florida, you're talking about not implementing results, and I mentioned a little bit about that later on in my talk.
And this is Christy from the Children's Museum, and I'm looking at some of the positive effects. And Carrie from Philadelphia is talking about staff interest and belief in the value. And I would say that's at the heart of what I've begun to experience in becoming more involved with evaluation. That the way it's kind of become more inclusive for more and more staff, and so that you really believe that it can have effect. It's been helpful.
I think Jennifer and some others, Jennifer from Nelson Atkins, you talk about collaboration across departments as being a very positive, and that has certainly rung true here at the Eiteljorg.
Well, thank you, everyone, for that list. Greg, am I correct that in recalling that you said we'll actually be able to capture what's been written in these dialog boxes? And
yes, indeed, we will. Great. So not to worry if you skipped everything zipping by you so quickly.
Okay. So that gives us a good list of the types of things that are happening in different organizations. And I'd like to talk about some of those factors in a little bit more detail. One of them being the environment. And part of the environment that people think about when thinking about evaluation are mandates and mission. Personally, again, back at the Detroit Institute of Arts, Evaluation took a big leap forward from 2002 to 2007 when the museum was engaged in reinstalling all of its permanent collection galleries. It was the central focus of the museum's work at the time. It was mandated that the new galleries would be more inviting to a broad range of visitors, which led to staff to really seek the help of visitor evaluation to help guide their work. So even though the museum had been doing kind of piecemeal evaluation here and there, that's when it really coalesced and really started to drive forward with that big event in the museum's history. The structure of your organization is also important. Again, with the DIA's reinstallation project, the structure was really relied heavily on cross-departmental teams, which made it a lot easier for evaluation to have a broader impact. When the project was over, the structure reverted a little bit more back to more individual, maybe a little bit more of the silos that we saw earlier, and separate work within departments, which made it more difficult for evaluation to be institution-wide because the institution was not as integrated at that point. Things are starting to swing back again now. And in terms of challenges and needs, the Detroit Institute of Arts, after the reinstallation project, went through a pretty traumatic financial situation. In 2008, the museum reduced its staff by 20% and began to pursue a regional millage vote, which became the new focus. And looking back at my time there, that constant threat to the museum's survival really did have a profound impact on our approach to evaluation, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Another key factor, and I think we saw some of this in terms of the lists that came up earlier, are staff and volunteers. The staff and volunteers are both your partners in the evaluation process, but they're also participants in the fact that they're the people who you're hoping to influence in some way at that kind of intermediate level. It's unlikely that most of the staff members in your organization have this tremendous wealth of knowledge about evaluation, this experience, and believe that you always have to do it no matter what, and you really have to invest in it. But as Christine was talking about earlier, there's this concept of evaluative thinking. And some staff members might be more accustomed to that type of thinking, which might make them more effective partners if you're looking for a place to start. Two of the authors who have done some writing about evaluative thinking are Tom Archibald and Jane Buckley. And according to them, they talk about evaluative thinkers as being people who tend to pose thoughtful questions, describe and illustrate their thinking, identify assumptions, actively pursue deeper understanding, consider alternatives, express belief in the value of evidence, and are inquisitive and skeptical. Hopefully you're able to think of a few people in your organization who have this type of mindset. And again, looking back at the DIA, we were fortunate that some of the museum's best evaluative thinkers were in positions of leadership, and I would include the DIA's director, Graham Beal, as someone in that category. Not an expert in evaluation, I think you would admit, but someone who has those types of characteristics that ask questions and can think evaluatively. And then there are those other factors. We saw that come up, money, time, came up in terms of projects moving quickly and maybe not being able to fit in evaluation. And some technological challenges, I think, were also on the list. Again, it's highly unlikely that you're going to have all the money and time required to implement all of the evaluation work that would be helpful to your organization. Even with 2 full-time staff evaluators at the DIA and additional funding for consultants and contractors, there were just some projects that we should have been doing and wanted to be doing but didn't have the resources. I think it's really important to recognize those boundaries and to think creatively about the options for expanding your capacity. And I think you'll hear more about Martha and Christy talk about partnerships that had a big impact on their organizations. But I think it's also important to be realistic about what can be achieved given your limitations. Sometimes the best you can do is something less than truly institution-wide evaluation. And I think that's okay. And it's something that you shouldn't be feeling like it's a weight or a failure. It is part of a process. So another part of the evaluation or logic model for evaluation would be, again, what is the impact? And what are the impacts on your staff members, your organization, the people served by the evaluation? So given your setting, what types of things do you hope staff members will think or feel in the short term? What types of things do you hope they'll do? And what do you hope the benefit of these changes will be for your organization? I think it's helpful to think about these things in the short term, maybe a year out, and then maybe 3 years out, and then maybe 5 years out. Again, this is a process. It is not going to be an overnight thing, like many change processes or learning situations. It takes time for these things to build. Again, talking about the DIA, given the financial challenges, the sustainability of the evaluation program was the short-term focus of our program. The outcomes that I was hoping for were fairly straightforward. I hope staff would believe that evaluation could help them solve some of the challenges they faced and achieve some of their goals. I hoped museum leadership would maintain the level of staffing and funding that was previously allocated to evaluation despite the severe financial challenges that the museum was experiencing. And I hope that museum staff would begin to see evaluation as part of the museum's daily business.
Matt, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Just to summarize what I was talking about in terms of our outcomes and desired outcomes at the DIA, massive financial challenges. We had 2 full-time staff evaluators and was really trying to touch as many people in the organization as we could to feel like evaluation was important enough to keep that capacity at the same level. I think another thing to keep in mind when you're talking about outcomes and goals is that they're likely to shift over time. Again, this is a long-term process. And as you could tell from what I said earlier, the museum was in a different place when it was going through the reinstallation project, in a different place when it was going through financial difficulties than it is now. So your goals are going to shift just like your program is going to change over time based on other changes in the environment and changing needs. So I'd like to finish with a couple of possible approaches to think about. So you know what your situation is, you know what your goals are, and now the question is, how do you bridge that? How do you get there? One of the things to think about, and a key question in terms of being institution-wide with evaluation, is access. A couple of different possibilities here: distributing the evaluation findings to all staff. Another would be organizing index reports for easy access. I think there are reasons why you might not share every evaluation with everyone, but I think in general it's going to help move you toward being institution-wide with your evaluation program. Even if staff members end up coming to you for information, posting the results and reports on a share file with some sort of index and an easy way to connect to those files helps send that signal that evaluation findings are an ongoing resource for everyone in the organization, not just something that you do once in a while, not for a single group, not at a particular time. And the illustration in the bottom right corner is the DIA's, part of the DIA's index of evaluation reports, which is just the date that it was done, the title of it, who did it, the types of information that are there, and connections then onto the share file. So again, structuring things in such a way that it communicates that these results are for everyone. Another important consideration is to think about your stakeholders. And again, there are different options here. You can do something like we did earlier in the reinstallation project, where you have these cross-departmental teams. So looking for those really big projects that are bringing people together and working with those. In other cases, after the reinstallation project, as I mentioned, things were a little bit more spread out, a little bit more of those silos. So one approach would be to bring people together around an issue that a particular evaluation issue, or to advise about evaluation as a whole. Another option here would be to interview staff from across the museum to find out what their information needs are and look for the commonalities. And if there are commonalities that people start to gravitate toward, that could form the basis of a team that you put together. We did more at the DIA of trying to bring together cross-departmental teams to advise on particular projects. We struggled with that a little bit. Not everybody was as equally invested in the question, so when it was a membership study, the membership people were really engaged, and maybe the educators and marketing people a little bit less so. I think Martha and Christy and Christine can talk about some other approaches that are a little bit more permanent that might be other options that might be a little more successful in your particular situation. And then the last issue is selecting scope. That came up on that issue of challenges. The whole idea of which you are going to have to prioritize most likely. So which direction do you go? One option, again, would be to evaluate the most critical projects and strategic goals. Again, that's kind of the reinstallation evaluation model, where that's the most important thing going on at the museum. Another model would be to work on at least one project with every department or division, which is what we eventually turned to when we after the reinstallation. Again, the overall strategy was to touch as many different areas and staff members as we could, in hopes of demonstrating the value of evaluation for the entire museum, not just a single department or division. That was a strategy that we used, again, because we were concerned about our survival. We were concerned about our sustainability, given the financial challenges of the museum. So I'll pause there for any questions. And if there's anything, I think some questions have been coming in. So.
Great. Thanks very much, Matt. This is Greg. I wanted to respond to a comment that our colleague Cynthia in the audience made about their strategic plan at their institution made evaluation a critical path, and so a new committee was formed. And while many of her colleagues had done departmental evaluation, thinking about it more institutionally has been a bit of a focus. They feel a little new to it. Plus, it's become what she calls additional duties as assigned. So getting a good team going has been a slower process, as many are already at workload capacity. I wonder if Matt, you, or any of our other presenters have any thoughts about Cynthia's comment. I think that is not uncommon, and I think it's actually a positive in terms of having those individual departments and individual studies start to build towards something bigger, and at least that outlook that this could be bigger. At that point, it again might be an idea of prioritizing. Which are the types of projects that are going to cut across the most departments and divisions. Maybe some sort of review of the evaluation work that's taken place so far, and trying to understand how it's been used and what's been seen as most valuable from different parts of the organization. But it does sound like it's a good path to be on, and it's a challenging problem, but something that I think shows a progression at your institution.
I just want to echo that, excuse me, Matt, that at the Museum of Science, we actually, the precursor to having an evaluation department was having a group of us whom I would consider to be accidental evaluators, where evaluation became one of our additional duties that we were doing. And we would gather monthly to talk about the evaluations we were working on. And at first, we just were gathering to get help and support on writing survey questions or how to analyze the data. But over time, we started noticing some common elements in the studies we were conducting. And we also started to recognize that all of us are engaged in this practice of evaluative thinking, and that it would be really exciting to push that out into the organization. And so we started hosting workshops for the rest of the organization about how to do evaluation. And when the museum decided to start an evaluation department, I think it was that work of that group, that cross-divisional group, that really set the tone for the evaluation department to be successful. Had we come in and not had that basis, and we just kind of plopped down and said, okay, there's this official group that's over there that's separate from the rest of you, and they're going to evaluate you, I'm not sure we would have been as successful as being emergent from the work that was already happening across the different departments. And so it might feel a little awkward at first, but I think a critical part in these groups is forming a coalition for change. And in some of the research on organizational change, in particular Cotter's work, forming a coalition to achieve a change is one of the most critical elements, along with having a vision for change and a sense of urgency. And so I think you can view this group as not kind of, more work to do, but as an opportunity to really shape the future direction for evaluation in the organization.
I wonder if one of you would like to address Mary Jane's comment. She asks if any of you could talk a little bit more about the system your organization uses to index and organize evaluation reports.
This is Martha at the Eiteljorg, and we have a shared, what we call the public system here at our museum. And so we each have our own, of course, files. We have departmental files that various people can access, and then we have a public file system which everyone can access in the museum. And within that, of course, folders. And so we've put all of our reports into this public system and send the links then to people that might be interested in accessing the reports.
And this is Matt. The system at the DIA is similar in that it's really just posting the reports in a shared folder, and the categories would be things like special exhibitions and permanent galleries and school programs, membership, market research. And we would routinely send links to those reports, but we also had a Word document that was posted in the folder. That was the index that I showed you with hyperlinks that when you click on the link, it would open up that particular file. I think we had dreams of someday having an intranet or an intranet system for that, and that was a temporary solution that became a more permanent solution as time went on.
And Matt, since you're talking about the DIA, Jim at the Henry Ford wants to know if things changed at DIA after evaluations. What kinds of actions were taken?
Well, that's a big question, and something that I reflected on quite a bit as I was leaving and thinking about the impact of evaluation on the DIA. I think it's going to depend from study to study. It was easier to maybe see the impact and short-term impacts on some of the evaluation work that would have gone on during the reinstallation project, and as special exhibitions are getting developed, what's called formative evaluation that's taking place as you're developing something. Other studies, I think, take more time, and again, this is an over time, a long-term type of approach that you might do a study 2 years ago. And I'm thinking of an example where we did a market audience segmentation study. And the director of marketing left in the midst of the survey, or the study. It wasn't, not a great deal of attention was paid to it, despite our efforts. But more recently, the museum has had a couple of things happen where there's been more strategic planning, and that group was able to pull that out and think about audience a little bit more. So I guess I would summarize by saying I think as an internal evaluator, and again, that from that sustainability standpoint, I would have always wanted to see more, and we were always pushing for more impact and more change. But always having to remind myself again of that model of organizational change and just learning that some of these things are cumulative and some of these things are going to take place over time, and that's an ongoing process.
Well, this is a question from Ariel, maybe for any one of you on our presenter panel. With internal and board evaluations, does everyone have an equal voice?
I would say at the Eiteljorg, we've included some of our board members and other stakeholders and certainly staff in some of the work that we've done. And yes, they actually do have an equal voice in what we've been doing.
Christy or Christine, any thoughts about that?
Well, I would say certainly I qualify as one of those accidental evaluators that people have alluded to. And from that viewpoint, yes, I feel that my voice is equal, certainly at least in the aspect of discussing what are the priorities, what are the questions that we want to find out about, that we want to evaluate. So, yeah, in some aspects, I certainly feel I have an equal voice.
Great. Thank you very much. And Matt, thanks very much for offering your perspective from DIA. And just as a reminder to everybody, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to type them into the chat box. We'll pause periodically throughout the program to address them as we can. And given how much time we have left over at the end of the program, we'll take any that seem to be remaining. But at this moment, I'd like to turn the stage over formally to Martha Hill from the Eiteljorg, who's going to share a little bit of background about their evolution of a visitor research program. Martha, thanks for being with us today.
Certainly. Thank you, Greg. Pretty excited to talk about the Eiteljorg and what we've been doing here. I'm going to talk about our visitor research at the museum, how it started, how it's evolved, and what we're doing now and where we'd like to go. Our program definitely is an evolving process. We don't have an individual whose title is evaluator, nor do we have anyone whose position is solely dedicated to visitor research. What we do have, though, are community collaborators and truly an ever-growing interest in and better understanding of the Eiteljorg visitors by our staff members. Over 17 years ago, our CEO and the Vice Chancellor at the neighboring IUPUI we're both looking for a way to link resources in a way that would benefit both institutions. So from the beginning, this collaboration provided free admission to the museum for IUPUI faculty, staff, and students, and provided the museum with access to faculty, students, and the campus library. Beginning in the late 90s, we developed a partnership committee, which included museum staff and university faculty and administrators. And this group was charged with exploring more substantial joint programming, including student internships, coursework using the museum as a laboratory, and then using museum staff as resources for the university courses. A vision at that point was also developed for a joint faculty position between the museum and the university, and in 2005 that became a reality with the hiring of public scholars who are tenure-track faculty members in the Museum Studies Department at IUPUI and also jointly appointed staff members in area museums. Two museums, ours and the Children's Museum here in Indianapolis, have joint appointments. Ours is in curatorial, and the Children's Museum is involved with families and learning. Both individuals are very active in their own museums, but they're also extremely involved with the greater Indianapolis community. And Dr. Ely Wood, who some of you may know and is pictured in the slide here on the left side, her appointment is with the Children's Museum. And she's definitely become a valued visitor studies consultant and colleague with many of the Indianapolis arts and cultural institutions. And she truly has played a key role in the development of our visitor research program at the Eiteljorg. Over the years, we've provided opportunities for museum studies master's students to intern in numerous departments. And we regularly approach Ely and her colleagues when we're looking for individuals with experience in visitor research. Several years ago, I hired one of her master's students as an intern, and within a year of her internship, I brought her on as our guest relations manager. And since she's joined the museum, in addition to managing admissions and reception, we've worked together to develop the visitor experience area, including an audience research program, which she now directs. Several years ago, the museum received an IMLS grant in which we had included funding for evaluation, which enabled us to support an IUPUI fellow with experience in evaluation. And we're now at the end of 3 years of jointly supported fellows, and we've hired our current fellow on contract through the summer to work with our curator of contemporary art on engaging visitors in the contemporary galleries. Up to this year, funding for our portion of the fellows had come from grant monies and a capital campaign and the summer contracts from the exhibition budgets. But this year, 2013, is the first year that we were able to add an independent budget line in the visitor experience area to cover evaluation. It's not a huge amount, but it's a start. We've been working on building institutional buy-in to the value of visitor research, and our fellows regularly give reports in our all-staff meetings and our exhibition team meetings, and they work very closely with our curators, our designer, and our programmers on projects. We've included the development staff in some of these sessions and have garnered support from them by providing the kinds of information they need for grant proposals and reports to sponsors. And you can see that's a very happy development team there, giving me the thumbs up when they were in their retreat the other day. After our CEO commented about evaluation at a board meeting, and I had mentioned this earlier, several board members have expressed interest in learning more about our visitor research efforts, and that's something that they'll be doing next month at their board meeting. But what I'd like to do is go over a few projects to give you a better understanding of how we are building that buy-in among staff. This summer, our evaluation fellow is working with our contemporary art curators on engaging visitors in the galleries and using feedback from visitors to affect this engagement. This may or may not seem earth-shattering, but it's huge at the Eiteljorg Museum. And I do have permission from our contemporary art curator. We've been talking about this quite a bit in terms of her involvement in evaluation and visitor research. 10 years ago, I can remember sitting in a meeting with her, and she was saying that she wasn't at all concerned with what the visitors thought about contemporary art. The collection was and is important, and she would create exhibitions. It was fine if visitors didn't get it. She didn't really care. But today, she cares. Today she's involved, she wants to talk with visitors, and she wants input. And so I've been wondering why the change. Well, first, I think she was tired of finding that people stopped at the entrance to the contemporary galleries. They'd look inside, and then they often walked into another gallery. And I think it's also a reflection of how the industry's evolved over the years. Visitor research, I think, has become more inclusive. Years ago, some staff felt left out, and they were left out. And now our curator's involved in the process. She is part of a team and is becoming more aware of what we can learn from our visitors and how that can lead to a more effective experience in the galleries. She's discovered, certainly, that if you have questions, visitors are going to give you answers. And it doesn't just, we've worked with other curators, and so in addition to the changes in the contemporary art, we've also focused on some front-end evaluation as our Western art curators are planning for a complete reinstallation of the Western galleries. Last summer, one of our fellows talked with visitors and also our board members and staff members about their conceptions of the West and Western art. She did an art sorting activity in which she engaged visitors with possible gallery themes the curators had been developing. She also worked with our designer to test the installation of 2 introductory objects as an orientation to the galleries. Some of what she found was surprising to the curators, and of course this led to more questions. And having the ability to go back and forth between working with the curators and talking with the visitors is really helping us refine thinking about the reinstallation plan. And this process is helping us uncover items and ideas and thoughts and ways that will be working, and it's going to be crucial to what we'll be doing in the galleries.， We're actually seeing similar buy-in in other areas of the museum as well and in other departments as we expand the visitor research beyond exhibitions to programming. Matt mentioned use of logic models earlier, and we are now regularly using the shaping outcomes model. And Greg, I believe this entire model, the worksheet, has been added to the handout, correct?
It has been. That's correct.
Okay. Well, using this logic model is helping us define who our partners, our stakeholders, and our audience are. It's helping us with project planning and relating the project elements to our mission. It also helps us define our desired outcomes, which then, of course, ties back into the project planning process. At first, a bit hesitant about evaluating a long-established artist residency program, the managers were unsure how feedback would be helpful to a program with a number of factors that they perceived were beyond their control. But working through this logic model and redefining the outcomes and goals of the residency program was a positive experience. Our fellow worked with the programmers, the artists, and the teachers and the students who actually are the beneficiaries of the residencies. The entire process from completing the logic model to the program evaluation helped the programmers rethink the most effective way to convey the goals for the program to the artists who have been and actually will be in residence. Feedback from the teachers and students is helping shape our residencies for this fall, and it's also going to help us shape our selection of artists for 2014. Two final projects I want to briefly mention are ongoing, where visitor feedback has directly impacted the installations. The first is our yearly holiday experience, Jingle Rails. This installation is a garden-scale railway, which features 6 trains journeying from the Indianapolis going west through many of the national parks. And each area the trains go through, they have well-known geological features and buildings that are constructed entirely out of natural materials. Every year we talk with and observe the visitors, and we also push out an electronic survey. And the visitor feedback has resulted in several changes, including a major change to the labels. Visitors wanted to see images of the actual buildings and features, and they wanted to know what materials were used to create them. So we added that to the labels. We also added QR codes to the labels for deeper content exploration. And of course, visitors wanted to touch the materials, so we added a hands-on cart. And then through the use of visitor voting tubes that you can see on the screen there, graphic design, we added an entire multi-building pod this past year, which was the Indiana State Fair. The changes to Jingle Rails each year are definitely a result of a project team composed of educators, designers, visitor experience folks, and curators listening to our audience and refining our presentation each year to reflect the visitor comments, suggestions, and their interests. And the last project that I want to mention is with our interactive Western family experience. I know I saw in the comments earlier as people were typing in, how many times do we do an evaluation after an exhibit opens? The exhibit comes down in a couple of months, and we haven't really used what we learned from the work that was done. We did a summative evaluation of our family center, which opened a couple of years ago. And this area features interactive experiences focusing on 2 contemporary Native American artists and their families, and 2 historic Western families from the 1800s. The research helped us understand that visitors weren't connecting to the 2 contemporary families, and they didn't spend as much time in the contemporary areas or watch the brief videos which featured the artists. We had budgeted for remediation, and over the past year, we reshot one of the videos with the artist physically in the area where he's featured. He's talking about himself, his art, and his culture, and he focuses on items that can be found in that huge replica bentwood box that's right beside the video monitor. With the other artist, who's a weaver, we moved her video monitor inside her home. We built a bench so that the adults could sit down and enjoy while their children or grandchildren were playing with the items in that area. We also installed life-size images of the artists, and we added laminated parent guides, which you'll see there on the right, that really are stressing that 2 of the families that they're experiencing are contemporary families or occur today, and then 2 are historic families and occurred yesterday. And so I'm hoping that we will have a chance, again, to do some evaluation there and see how that's working out in terms of some of the remediation that we did. The research activities that I've mentioned here at the Eiteljorg and the development of the Visitor Experience Department and emphasis on visitor research has been made possible really through a long-term commitment of the museum and IUPUI, and particularly to the Museum Studies program, and really to building relationships, to accessing and working with the local resources, and to keeping both institutions and programs' missions and goals in mind. What we can learn by engaging with and listening to our visitors, it's no longer just valued by a few at the museum. Now there's more buy-in, there's more global understanding of the importance of the visitor's perspective when developing any project, whether it's a program or an exhibition. The question is, are we where we want to be? No, but we certainly have more staff buy-in, and that staff buy-in truly is at all levels. Our CEO just recently said he wants to see a visitor experience staff member on all project teams. The curators, the educators, and programmers, and our designer want to test ideas about engaging visitors. And the development team, probably about 110% behind what we're doing. Our challenge now, though, is to channel that buy-in that we've received to actual dollar support for a permanent year-round visitor research position. In fact, yesterday I was in a meeting because we're going to, our contract for our evaluator over the summer is coming to an end in August, and we are discussing this topic. We're bringing people together who have a stake in what we've been able to do with evaluation recently, really to make the case, because we're in the middle of our budgeting process right now and looking at what we'll be able to do in 2014 with evaluation and visitor research. So that's where we are, and that's our challenge as an institution.
Martha, this is Greg. Thanks very much for sharing your experiences at the Eiteljorg, and I appreciate the various programs that you presented. We had a question that came in a bit ago from Gwen that may be for you or for any of our other presenter colleagues. Gwen wants to know how you are deciding what to evaluate and what methods do you use. It's probably not a one-size-fits-all for either the decision-making or the methodology.
Right. Again, this is Martha. That question certainly has come up, especially as we're looking at our resources for what we're going to be able to do with evaluation projects, say even in the next several months, because with reports that we've had in staff meetings and our exhibit team meetings and program team meetings, everybody really does understand how important finding out what the visitors and the stakeholders feel and getting input from them. And so we have so many projects at this point. We have been hitting primarily the big exhibitions that we've been doing, and of course the year-round Western Interactive Area and Jingle Rails. So it's going to be hard for us to start to prioritize. I think it's going to be a challenge for us. But that's where we are. We have been up to this point able to work on all the projects that everybody has been interested in. But as I said, with the buy-in, that's really starting to explode. So we're going to be facing that decision-making.
Thank you, Martha. Christine, any thoughts about that?
Yes. So I will say that our evaluation department started off as myself and a half-time research assistant, and that was 9 years ago. And we are now a department of 12, and we still don't have enough resources to do all the evaluations that the organization is interested in. So even with the luxury that we have to prioritize. And I think what's happened over time is we've become better at prioritizing. And I think of two areas that are critical for priority projects. One is an area where we're doing a lot of experimentation. So if we're trying to push the envelope with employing new practices that we haven't had experience with before, trying to do something that hasn't been achieved in the field before, anything that's really where we know we're on shaky ground, we absolutely do evaluations. And in fact, we use evaluation as a key experimental tool, and some people say it makes them feel more comfortable to experiment because they know they have a safety net. And then the other area that I think is really critical is anything that is high profile from the visitor perspective. So if we just relaunched our website, so an entirely new website. So that was something as an organization, we said, okay, we know that there has to be evaluation that's involved with that. We have a new 12,000 square foot exhibition. Evaluation has been an integral part of every piece of that project. What's happened is because it's such a need is that what we don't want to do is if anyone's just someone who has a lone interpretation cart, a volunteer who's out on the floor and has done the same old interpretation cart for the last 20 years but really wants to improve it, what we don't want to say is, no, you can't have evaluation because you're not a priority project. So we've actually started a process where we've created evaluation tools and mechanisms as part of another project we're in called NISENet that enable practitioners to embed evaluation into their work. So it's really quick, easy ways to gather some data and then reflect upon that data that can be a part of your practice that anyone can do it who's interested in doing it. And this idea of everyone becoming kind of a mini evaluator is part of the way that we're trying to meet this demand. But to meet that, what we don't want to do is make the standards that we have for our big evaluation studies be the same for the volunteers, the interpretation cart. So for the scaled back version that they're able to do, it makes it easy to embed in their work.
Thanks, Christine. And our colleague Caitlin in our audience today has a comment and a question. She says, it seems like an important part of institutionalizing evaluation is to create products that help staff with what they believe their jobs to be. And Martha, your example was about contemporary art curators. Any other examples from our other presenters, perhaps?
Well, this is Christy from the Children's Museum, and actually that's kind of what my part of the presentation is about, is largely how myself, as certainly kind of an outsider or an accidental evaluator, have become more involved and sort of a process or a group that we now have to keep that kind of discussion, to have really creative use and apply that to a lot of different projects.
Well then, Christy, why don't we just use that as a great segue into your component of the program, which is about the evaluation strategy at the Children's Museum.
Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. I do want to start my portion of the program with a little bit of a disclaimer. As I just mentioned, I kind of consider myself the voice of inexperience on this team. Unlike my fellow presenters, I'm not an evaluation professional. I'm a conservator. And I would say until recently, my take on evaluation has had a lot more to do with monitoring relative humidity readings, assessing artifact condition, and those kinds of things, rather than actually observing and interpreting visitor experiences. But a couple of years ago, I was invited to be part of the research and evaluation group here at the Children's Museum. This group was created by Dr. Barbara Wolf, our head of evaluation and research, and by Dr. Ely Wood from IUPUI and our public scholar of museums, family, and learning. The goal was to invite staff members from all over the museum to become more knowledgeable about the process of evaluation and hopefully more creative about its possible applications. As many people have alluded to, this whole idea of getting all of us to be more evaluative in our thinking. My experience with this group has been very enlightening and has certainly influenced the development of a new evaluation project that's meant to fine-tune both the composition and the use of our collection. Here's a lovely overall picture of the Children's Museum, and I guess want to just bring out the idea that we are big. I think the picture kind of shows that, and it's a large staff here, about 350 people, but within research and evaluation, as other other people have talked about it, actually a very small staff. So the idea that more and more people from throughout the museum are being involved in this has been really, really helpful. Before I really get going on our path of evaluation at the Children's Museum, would anyone in the audience like to share examples of how evaluation has been applied at your museum, especially kind of creative or out-of-the-box examples that you've used?
And Christy, while we're waiting for folks to respond with a couple of comments, I just wanted to reflect on something that Anthony asked earlier on in our program, in which he asked, what strategies would you recommend to encourage and increase visitor participation in evaluation? Wondering if any of our presenter colleagues have any comment on that.
This is Martha at the Eiteljorg. I think one of the things that has worked really well for us with visitors, and we've tried to engage adult visitors and children's visitors, is to make it kind of like a game. Like we've used magnetic boards with images of art and having people kind of do some sorting activities with the art. When I was talking about the reinstallation work with the Western Galleries, we put the themes up there and then had people sort the artwork as if they were the curator. Where would they put these pieces and how would they fit together thematically? We've done some meaning mapping, observation, of course, and a lot of interviews.
And this is Christy, and again, I'll talk about this a little bit more further on in my presentation. But another thing we're doing here is fairly recently, we actually are going to have a dedicated space that presently we're just calling the testing space. But staff members from throughout the museum can actually sign up for periods of time to be able to go in and test everything from interactives. We actually have somebody who wants to test components of the traveling exhibit booth that are used. And again, we're going to be testing some collections pieces in that space. But it's just an area that we'll be able to invite visitors directly to that space to do different testing.
And Christy, it looks like our colleagues in the audience are responding with a variety of ways that evaluation has been applied, everything from surveys and collection of zip codes, focus groups, feedback forms, Google Analytics, Facebook, member surveys, other types of social media, prototyping, exit surveys. Yeah, a pretty wide range of stuff that folks are engaging in.
Yeah, I see someone has an evaluation toolkit. I like that idea. Let's see. Well, to go on and give you a little bit of information about how evaluation has developed and kind of how I've become part of it here at the museum, I would say at the museum, our fundamental goal in conducting evaluations is to help provide staff with a method of measuring how well our work effectively fulfills our mission. And I think that that's true for most everyone in the museum field. We're all mission-driven and hoping to find ways to make sure we're really meeting that goal. At the Children's Museum, we focus on providing opportunities for family learning into our exhibits and programs. We use a number of identified family learning behaviors to plan for and evaluate visitor experiences throughout the museum. Examples of the behaviors include things like reading a label aloud, pointing at an object in a case, doing an interactive together, talking about the content, or even recalling a memory. All these activities indicate a high level of engagement with exhibits and programs. This next slide is part of one of the handouts that have been provided for this presentation. And in addition to just being a really pretty slide, I thought it really gave a nice overview of how long this process has been an institutional goal at the Children's Museum, how long we have been looking at including family learning at the Children's Museum, and how we've used evaluation to make sure that we are meeting those goals. So you can look back as early as 1983. There were plans to begin incorporating that into exhibit development and programs. And kind of leap ahead a little bit, if you look to 2006 and 2007, one thing that I really wanted to share with you that has been a great tool is the implementation of what we call our one-sheets. And the one-sheets have really helped become a part of our development of exhibits. And it grew from our goal to have a method to measure how well we're using those family learning goals. Excuse me, I sort of lost my place there, pardon me. So to get a little bit further on the one-sheets, they've really helped us define the big idea for every element that's in the exhibit, and then to begin to look at how do we incorporate our family learning goals with that. You can see we're looking at everything from what is the big idea, what are the main messages, and then how do we really want to incorporate our exhibit elements, whether they're interactives, artifacts, whatever elements we are including in that, we're able to define it, and for everyone on the team to really have a way to measure how well we're, again, meeting the goal. Certainly here at the museum, the evaluation is created by users and shapers, and it's a term that Ely Wood has used a lot, and I really like it because, again, I think it's kind of another way to describe that whole idea of being an accidental evaluator, and I think that that's the user. Ely sort of describes that the shapers are those more the professional evaluators who really have the expertise and can really make sure that we're providing accuracy and consistency in all of our methodologies. But the users are those of us who really are going to have the buy-in and have the prioritization of what are the questions we need to ask, what are the ways that that can be implemented, and how can that really be important in the work that we do. So this group that was created, it's really been going on for quite a while, but by 2010, a group of over 20 people from around the museum. It incorporates 11 different departments. And the thing that I really enjoy the best about this is that it's a monthly meeting. So we're not just meeting to work on a particular project and the individual challenges for each project, but it's an opportunity for us to have ongoing discussions, brainstorming, and collaboration, and really functions for me as almost a class to continually engage with the idea of research and evaluation and begin to have a common language with people throughout the museum about what that means and how we can best use that. And certainly this ongoing these ongoing meetings and the discussion really provided some of the concept that led to our whole idea for collection planning and looking at family learning goals and how we might make that a research project here. And I want to share one more form that has been used, that we've used here with the research group. And this was something that Ely provided to us to help those of us, again, who are not professionals, who are not research and evaluation professionals, to have an idea what the real competencies should be for people who are trained in this and do this all the time, and for us to be able to come to the discussion having a better sense of what do we know, what do we not understand, and when do we really need to work with the group or with our research and evaluation department to really make sure, again, that we're providing accuracy and consistency. And so the form actually helps us break down what some of those competencies should be, and then we can discuss through that what our level of competency is. And certainly I felt with this in the group, it was never meant as a, well, here's the people who really know what they're doing and here are the people who don't, but it was a chance for us all to, again, have a common language and a common understanding of the details that we needed to bring to each project and the considerations that were going to be part of that discussion and how much we could provide that and then how much we needed to go to our research and evaluation department. So some of these discussions really led to this idea of how we could apply research and evaluation with the whole mission-driven idea of family learning as being our real goal with that to an object rating project. And the idea with this is that we are going to try to see if we can really look at making sure that the artifacts that are in our collection and how we present those to our visitors really engage our visitors in ways that are meaningful to them. Does it encourage some of those family learning activities that we talked about, everything from conversation and recalling memories and really pointing out different components of the exhibit? And we wanted to make sure that our policies and practices within collections department really are in line with the mission. It's also an opportunity for people within the collections department, so curatorial staff, conservation staff, to really build more and more knowledge about family learning. And then for us to also understand how well are the objects that we're using and collecting and presenting to our visitors, how well is that really connecting and engaging our visitors. And I guess I also want to mention with this that we certainly don't expect this to take the place of the knowledge and experience that our curators already bring to our collection and the artifacts that we have. But it's meant to be as an additional tool. Certainly a way for us to refine a collection that maybe over the years is maybe not quite as in sync with some of our exhibition projects and goals, and to really kind of help bridge a gap. I don't know if this exists in other institutions, but certainly here in the exhibit development process, there's that constant circle of question of between the exhibit developer saying, well, what do we have? And the curator saying, well, what do you need? And then what do you have? What do you need? And it's kind of this circular motion that sometimes is difficult to really define what's going to be the most effective artifact to really implement the goals of the exhibit. So we can look back to about, I believe this was in 2009, a prototype for this type of research was done. Dr. Ely Wood and some of her students from IUPUI Museum Studies program helped us do some research on a particular case. This was our Star Toys case. And I do want to mention that the slide that you're looking at, you see all those letters. That was not actually part of the exhibit, but that was part of the data collection tool and helped those researchers who were gathering data and talking with our visitors to point out different parts of the exhibit and ask questions about that. So it didn't look quite like that here in the museum. But it was an opportunity for us to begin really talking to our visitors very specifically about what did they like or not like or what were they interested in particular artifacts and how they were presented and how did that have impact on how much time they spent and how much conversation they had about these artifacts. And it really was able to give us some very, very specific information. Things like, even though there were 16 groupings of artifacts It's not even that good of a photograph. But yeah, there's everything from Star Wars and Star Trek and early Matt Mason. I don't know if there's some people in the audience that
Major
recognize
Matt
that.
Mason.
Yeah, Star Trek, and so it was an overview of all those a wide spectrum of Star toys. So that was kind of the prototype that told us, yes, we can get that kind of information, and it can really begin to have impact on what we select to exhibit and how we exhibit it, what our audience wants to know about it. So again, in these research and evaluation group meetings, we began to talk, well, how could we take that one step further and really begin to apply that not only at what is selected for exhibition, but how can we really look at the whole content, the whole composition of our collection, which for us is over 100,000 pieces, very, very heavily used. We in an average year use 10,000 pieces in exhibits and programs here at the museum. But to really begin to have evidence that, yes, we are picking things that engage our visitors in the way we want to, we wanted to be able to get some more information about that. So the opportunity that we found was actually a textile rehousing project that obviously doesn't sound very interesting to visitors, but was something, it was an IMLS grant that we received in 2012 to upgrade our storage system. Our whole textile collection is about 8,000 pieces, and it's a very major project that's going on for 2 years. And what we looked at was that for our curators, it was already a portion of the collection that they were spending a lot of time with and doing a lot of critical evaluation on, certainly condition, as well as some contextual information. We were also making sure that we were going to be upgrading the database. And so it really was something that we were already within the collections department spending a lot of time with. And we thought this was a great opportunity for then us to begin to look at how do we begin to understand what the visitor thinks about these pieces. And again, I don't want to say, I don't mean to present this that our curators have no idea about that, but it certainly does, it just adds another tool, a toolkit, definitely, of making sure we're selecting things that are meaningful to our audience. So what we will be doing this summer is actually using this testing space that I talked about. It's an area within the museum that has kind of been freed up at least through the end of the summer, and we are going to be scheduling time in there to bring individual pieces from the textile collection with some interpretation, and certainly looking at how we are displaying them. Having said that, it's not really a full-fledged exhibition that we're doing, so we're not evaluating an exhibition. We're trying to get some more particular information about individual artifacts and how visitors respond to that. So we're hoping that will begin this summer and fall, and we'll continue on that research throughout the end of this year, and hope to actually have some useful data by mid-2014. And I guess the question with this is, what will success look like? And I think certainly within our department, within collections staff, there is some, I guess I would say, skepticism. There is hope and there's skepticism about how well will this work. Will it really tell us what artifacts should be in the collection, both from maybe a condition standpoint, from sometimes it has to do with size. Are they the most giant things like the 15-foot robot that we have in the Welcome Center? Obviously, really iconic pieces like Barbie and Ken, huge things like the polar bear that we have on exhibit here at the museum that's a perennial favorite. But what are those things about individual artifacts that really draw our visitors and really engage them in ongoing conversation and interest? So there's really, we kind of feel like there's no way to fail. We'll certainly be getting more information. It'll just be up to us to really begin to look at how well can we apply that then to long-term planning for the collection and strategic planning for what we want to keep in the collection, possibly what we feel maybe no longer is appropriate for our collection. So kind of really this more long-term, big picture thinking. And again, how well does the collection as a whole really fit the mission of family learning within all of our exhibits and programs? So that's an idea or a little window into how we're doing evaluation here at the Children's Museum, and how I, certainly as one of those accidental evaluators, have been drawn into the process more, and I'm really excited about the opportunities that this might provide for us in ways that I've not thought about in quite a long time.
Christy, great. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective, and I would hardly consider you an outsider in this group of colleagues, so thank you for being a part of it. And with that, I know that we're a couple of minutes over, but I wanted to give our presenters an opportunity to wrap up with some key takeaways or big thoughts, and also to remind all of you in the audience that we will be going into what we call overtime, where we'll spend about 10 or 15 minutes with our presenters, who will have all graciously agreed to stick around and answer questions and talk about any lingering issues related to institution-wide evaluation. So we hope you'll stick around. And Mike, I know that we have an evaluation that we'd like to bring up in case any of you do have to scoot off to the rest of your day. Just feel free to click on that yellow evaluation button in the upper left-hand corner of your screen to let us know your feedback on this program. So with that, I'm going to ask our colleague Christine Reach to give us some of her key takeaways on this topic. Christine.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. This has been a really great presentation, and I'm just going to reflect on a few key themes that I heard. And I think one of the things we're talking about, and Matt certainly alluded to it, and Martha and Christy gave us great examples of it, is that to make evaluation institution-wide really means going about and initiating an organizational change. And one way to think about it in organizational change is that you're trying to facilitate organizational learning, which is different than the individual learning of the professionals in the organizations. This idea that the organization takes on this learning itself, so that even if someone who initiated evaluation at first leaves the organization, it's still there and it's left behind and its imprint. And there's a few things that I heard people talk about. One is this need to kind of form a coalition. Certainly, Matt talked about this in the beginning, talking about identifying stakeholders, and that can really help to support the change if it's not just one person pushing, but who are all the different internal advocates. Sometimes they're formal, and sometimes they're just informal individuals who push for it. The need to embed evaluation into your work. I know that it often can be hard not having enough time or money to do it, and so one way to start it out is to embed evaluation into big projects. Those big projects, we tend to have a little bit more time and a little bit more space to experiment, and so that's a good way to start experimenting with evaluation. And certainly some of the examples that were given here show that that was an approach that was used. The other thing that I heard talked about was this idea of people sharing and acting upon findings. This was one of the negatives I saw on the list at the very beginning of the presentation, the idea that people don't always use evaluation. And I'd like people to think a little bit more broadly about what that means. Sometimes it may mean that for an evaluation, it gives a recommendation to change a specific aspect of a specific exhibition, and that change never happens. But there's a lesson that was learned behind it that does get enacted. And so I see this all the time, that there are findings from some of our evaluations that become part of the organization's conversation. And that's when I really know our evaluations are being used. Not when one specific action from one specific finding is taken, but when lessons learned become integrated into our conversations. So as we push for findings, what we try to do is not necessarily push for people to read specific reports, but to actually encourage people to share and discuss what they feel they're learning from evaluations throughout the organization. So it becomes, our findings also become part of that organizational learning. And then the other thing that I think is fantastic, that's going back to way to the beginning, is this idea that there's so many people out there who are doing professional development in groups today. One of the things about organizational learning is it's very hard for one professional to take their external learnings and bring it into an organization. But when a group is working together and learning together, they start developing shared understandings. And what's really critical, I think, for all of you to take something you've done today and tie it directly into your practice. Enact it into a project immediately, because that makes it more likely to become part of your organizational learning. And then finally, I just want to reiterate this point that I've been seeing throughout everyone's presentations, is that they're using, everyone who presented today, talking about using evaluation not to prove their worth, but to improve their worth as organizations. And that's really, I think, the power of evaluation for our field, and it's great to see that we're moving in that direction.
Great, Christine. Thanks very much. Matt, what are your big, lofty takeaway thoughts on this?
I think I would echo everything that Christine said, but particularly just we really have focused a lot of the attention on not that kind of summative evaluation for reporting purposes and because you have to do it, but it is a tool for organizational development and organizational learning. And part of what you can learn is not necessarily just what's in the report, but it's just going through the process of talking about visitors, thinking about visitors, figuring out what questions are important to you, and what they talk about as process use, as being just doing the evaluation itself can have an impact on staff regardless of what's learned.
Thanks, Matt. And Martha, what are your closing thoughts here?
Well, I, too, absolutely agree with what Christina said. And it really hit home with me yesterday in a meeting that I referred to. We're looking at how we can get a full-time visitor researcher on staff at the museum. We're currently doing our budget for 2014. It's going to be a challenge. But what we did yesterday with my visitor experience director, who's working with our fellows and others on the research that we're doing here at the museum, we pulled together what I guess I would call it kind of a users team. They're advocates for what we're doing with visitor research and such. And in the meeting yesterday, we were talking about we're hiring a tech person soon who will be working in exhibit design, and we're looking at implementing some technology into the galleries, the contemporary galleries, the Western galleries, our Native American galleries. And our key question, as we were thinking what that's going to look like down the road in the next couple of years, is how can we do this without visitor research? How can we do it without talking to our visitors, doing some prototyping, getting feedback before we actually implement things into the galleries. And so I think the big takeaway for me here is you need to have a users team, you need to have advocates, and the teamwork is just so important.
Thank you, Martha. Christy, any thoughts that you have to add?
Yeah, I guess I also really liked something that Christine said about understanding that evaluation is about improving your work, not just proving its worth. And I think that's really important for, again, those of us who are not particularly used to thinking about our work in that way. And it does feel empowering. The more I know about it, the more it's kind of an exciting, and you see a lot of potential and not just paperwork. So it can be very empowering.
Nice. I like that. I like that very much. And I'm looking at a comment that our colleague Katie Ross had a little bit ago, in which she wants to know a bit more about some of the tools that you've used to embed evaluation into everybody's work and how you go about creating that culture of staff as mini evaluators. I know you've talked about some logic models and team initiatives. Anything that we haven't covered in that, some practical tools for colleagues to help them out. And Matt, I know that you shared something in the chat box as well.
I was actually responding to one of the earlier questions about just some good resources, introductions to evaluation in museums. So put one book and a couple of websites to think about. I think in terms of addressing Katie's question, I had less experience with that. I have to say, in terms of evaluation work at the DIA, we tended to have people working with us through the evaluation department. And we didn't get to that stage where we thought people would be trained to do it as part of their work. We have some examples where we were working with maybe studio staff and program staff, just some questions that they could ask themselves to reflect. But again, I don't know if this was part of our survival strategy or not, but we tended to be a little bit more centralized, and just made some of those hard decisions about which projects we were going to engage with and which ones we weren't.
So I did post the NISNet Team-Based Inquiry Guide up on the chat section, and you can find it by going to nisnet.org and Tools and Guides, and it's called Team-Based Inquiry. And the thinking around team-based inquiry is that using data to inform your practice is just a great skill for all practitioners to have. And there's a lot written in formal education of using this type of what's called practitioner inquiry to engage teachers in richer practice. And then there's also writings from the field of business that refer to the ability to engage in reflective practice on your own business work. And so with that in mind, we created the Team-Based Inquiry Guide for NISNet, knowing that not every organization has an evaluator. And so I did post that up, and I think you have to apply different standards. And one of the standards, for example, that is different is that when you're doing this type of inquiry about your own practice, one of the conditions that you just know about the studies you're doing is it's limited to your own practice. It's your own question. You're gathering data about your own practice, and that's what you're focused on. And a way that you can analyze the data that can enhance its trustworthiness in the analysis is by doing the data analysis as a group and doing data discussion. So looking at the data, and rather than immediately jumping to interpretation and kind of conclusions, you look at the data and you actually describe what it is that collectively you're seeing as a group. And that can be a form of data analysis that makes it more meaningful. There are other really cool things that are in that guide. And then there are things I've just seen happen at our organization in really fun ways, like one of our educational programs is a drop-in program kids are always arriving and leaving, and we're trying to figure out how long do they spend there. And one of our educators started giving children different colors of duct tape and would put them down at their workstation, that color of duct tape, and start the corresponding colored stopwatch. And she just had a bunch of stopwatches that she would press and start and stop as children with those different spaces would come and go. And so it's thinking creatively about how you collect the data so it's part of your work, not that much extra effort, and then also thinking creatively about how you do the data analysis.
Christine, thanks. And you just tackled another question that came in about doing some evaluation with children. Wondering if any of you have any thoughts about that.
This is Martha. We do try to talk with children, particularly because we were working on the evaluation of our family area. And I think one of the key ideas, and it is so simple and so obvious, but you got to think about whether or not this happens. When you're talking with children, get down on their level. Either kneel down on the floor and talk to them face to face, or sit down, and it really does help open up a dialogue. And it also allows you to talk to the child and maybe gives an indicator to the parent that you'd like to hear from the child and not perhaps a parent's interpretation of what they think their child is doing or thinking. A lot of things that we also do, some interactive activities with the children and sometimes with the parent and the child. But then also we'll have children do meaning maps, and if they have the words to do meaning maps, they do that. Otherwise, they might draw some of the concepts that they might, say, associate with something that we're doing. So I think it's important to kind of really engage the children and make it fun. Make it fun, kind of like a game.
Yeah, that's a great point. We're an interactive science museum, so we're constantly trying to think about how do we make our evaluations as fun and interactive as the exhibits that we're trying to evaluate. And card sorts is a great activity that we employ often as part of our evaluations, where we're providing visitors with a group of pictures or words and then asking them to sort them into different categories and then reflect upon their sorting. And it's a way of getting them, in some ways, to kind of map out their categorization scheme, their mental model of what things are like other things and why. And so thinking about how you can make the evaluation an activity is something that certainly works well for children as a strategy and is appropriate for us in our own museum.
And Christine, while I've got you on the line, Carolyn wants to know if there's any books or articles about museum evaluation that you can recommend. I know we have a few titles in the AAM online bookstore, but there might be something else that we don't have.
So Matt listed one, which is the Practical Evaluation Guide. I certainly recommend that particular book. I also find it's really helpful to go outside of museum field occasionally. And so Haley Preskel is one of my favorite authors, and she and another author, Russ F., has written a book called Evaluation in Organizations that I find to be really meaningful. It's more about getting this kind of system-wide evaluation and less kind of here's how to write a survey, but it is useful for thinking about this institution-wide evaluation approach. And as Matt mentioned, there's also the Visitor Studies Association website, and CARE's website is temporarily not as rich as it used to be, but we'll be putting lots of resources up there soon.
And as you all have been talking about the team approach to your work, it's making me think of a really awesome book on team dynamics called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni that I use a lot in my own work. And I just did a quick screen grab of his model that I think is pretty useful. Of course, the bottom of this model is the foundation of everything that we do in our team efforts, which is trusting each other, being able to disagree or engage in healthy debate, having a shared commitment, holding each other accountable, and really focusing on results. And it sounds like everything that you all are talking about is focusing on that ultimate impact, the impact of the work that we do in our museums, programs, exhibitions, and such. So I thought I'd bring that up here and see if any of you had any thoughts as it pertains to your own teamwork that you do in evaluation.
My immediate thought is that the top two portions of the triangle, avoidance of accountability and inattention to results, I feel like evaluation helps to solve some of those problems. Right? So evaluation, you can think of it as an accountability, and some people think of that as more of an assessment and approve of work. But I think it's this idea of avoiding accountabilities. You're kind of also an inattention to results. It's hard to do those two things if there's an evaluation present within a group.
And this is Matt. I think my reaction to it would be, again, to go back to something that Christine talked about in her closing. When thinking about results, to be thinking broadly about what that can mean, not just was X recommendation followed in such and such